Hey kids, today's project is installing fender flares on the Jeep. Got the fender flares from the eBay. Spent right at about $140 for them. They're good quality. They're not a name brand, but you know, at that price, they're certainly going to do the job. I've looked at the name brand ones on some other people's Jeeps, and then of course I ordered these and I got them, and the difference is in the thickness of the flare, and of course only time will tell how they hold up. But let's get started and I'll show you the flares. So step one is you take your flares and you install the rubber seal on the edge where it connects to the paint. There's really nothing to it. You just slide it on, get it to the size, and trim it off. Now, a little trick whenever installing this type of seal that sits on something and is only held on with you know, the tension in between the two items. When you're installing it, what people have a tendency to do is unwittingly, as you're installing it, you know, you kind of are pressing it in, but as you're pressing it on and going down an edge, what you're inevitably doing is giving a slight stretch to that rubber. So you're giving it a stretch, and what happens is with motion and time, it will contract again to the original size of it. So when you get it on, before you trim it, what you want to do is grab a hold of it and giving it a slight pinch, pressing it all the way back to your start point, and you'll hear it and feel it moving and releasing that stretch, so that what happens in time is you'll develop a gap where this will stretch back up, and the opposing side will stretch back up because it's been stretched and it's been stretched out, so it wants to contract back to its place. So that's just a little tech tip. So once you've trimmed it, basically what you want to see is that it's almost pushing down against both edges as opposed to trying to pull itself away from the edges. Alright, so the next step is coming up to the fender flares that are on the Jeep, and you're going to be removing all the factory screws that are in there. This is an 04 Wrangler, and these are a 5/16, and I'm going to be using an air ratchet, 1/4 inch drive, and always remember to oil your tools and they'll give you years of service. Alright, so here we go. Let's take these off. Alright, so there we've taken off the original fender flare. Obviously there's a little bit of cleanup work to do here. Alright, so now you've got your Jeep cleaned up. You've got your flare. Now you decide where you're going to put it. Now, it's not going to line up with the original holes. So what I decided I wanted to do was go at least as high as the original fender, and you can see the line where that fender has sat since 2004. So I went right over that line so I won't see it. I made sure that my top line of my fender was nice and square with the top line of the back edge of the Jeep. I made sure I was symmetrical all the way around. Then I took my long narrow Sharpie that would fit inside the holes, and I went around and I marked all the holes. Now that you've marked all your holes where you want to drill, you go ahead and drill your pilot holes. You've got your pilot holes all drilled for your self-tapping screws to go in. Alright, so now I've got my 8 self-tapping screws and washers prepped. And you might be tempted to use a power tool, which I'm going to do. You're going to want to get yourself an extension so that your chuck isn't scratching up the fender, so that you can reach all the way in without your chuck coming into contact with the fender. And that's the first fender flare install. Now we're going to go over to the other side and do it again. Here you can see the difference in the depth of the flare from factory to the deep pocket flare. It is definitely covering the entire wheel. As you can see by looking at the front, the fender doesn't completely cover the wheel. And what happens, like when we go out to the beach, is the side of the Jeep gets completely covered in sand. And same with the back. The whole back, the sand just came around the side of the fender flare. And so now with these, I should no longer have that problem. Another tip, once you've got your holes drilled and you're going to install your screws, go real slow and set your chuck setting to about, I set mine at 10 at first, and that wasn't even enough to cut the metal. And then I turned it up to 15, and that was able to cut the screw into the metal. And you want to be real cautious on your trigger pull, real smooth, and just make it go just cut in. I started on the top 2 and then worked my way around, working my way down to the ends, and then once I had them all in, from underneath I could see sunlight all the way around the edge, and I just very carefully kept going from screw to screw, turning it another 1/8 of a turn to draw in the fender until it was nice and tight. And then from up above, I would turn it that last 1/16 of a turn, watching how much pressure it was putting on the fender. You can actually watch it as it draws in the fender. I guarantee if you over tighten these, you'll A, either strip out the screw, or B, you'll pop it right through the plastic of the fender. You want it just tight enough that obviously the screws aren't going to back out, that the fender is solidly mounted and it's not rattling or wiggling. It's not carrying any load, so you don't have to wrench it down to where these are getting sucked in, because I guarantee if you do that, the first time anything hits this, it's gonna break at your screw attachment points. Anyway, that's my tech tip there. Coffee is good. There you have it. New flares on the back of the Jeep. Now we'll move on to the front. Alright, so now we're going to take off the front fender, and of course you have the light to contend with. So we're going to pull the light wire out, and then once we get the fender off, then we'll deal with getting the indicator on. Alright, so here I've pulled the lens and light holder for the indicator. It comes out of the factory hole, and here it goes into the cutout. But as you can see, their molding isn't quite exact, so I'm going to have to do a little bit of trimming to the hole right at that corner there. So I'm going to go get the Dremel. So the way these are is, I've seen other people melt them down, but really if you look, the factory has them installed with this little bite screw, and I'm just going to use that again just to get that to screw down and hold the lens into place. So on the front flares, the very front and the very last screw line up. Yeah, I got a little bit of cancer there. There's a couple spots on it that I've got to clean up. that's future projects. There's a couple spots, and they all seem to be on this side, but right under the hood there's a little hole, and I got one there. But those are for another time. All right, there you have it. All four installed, solid and complete. Now a couple of side notes. I bought a set of these light and signal roll cages, and if you're gonna put aftermarket flares, these are made to fit on the factory flares, and so this is not going to work. Sticks out, gosh, ½ inch on the front. So without some major modification to the metal, I'm not going to be able to put these on the side markers. I'll still be able to put it on the front and on the rear signals, but not on the front, on the side indicators. But as always, be prepared for installation surprises. Certainly the name brands are going to fit probably exactly at the factory mounting holes. You won't have to drill. The fronts, for example, the very front and the very back fit exactly into factory holes, and the rest require drilling. On the back, they all require drilling and then screwing in the self-tapping screws. But as long as you feel confident with your skills and being careful, and you're prepared for different eventualities that might, different curveballs that might come your way, you should be able to get it done in a couple hours. So there you have it. There you have it, kids. Pocket fender install on the Jeep. Love y'all.